Now, the ICC seems to have focused its claims around unlawful deportation of children from Ukraine to Russia. Why has the court centred its argument around that particular issue in particular?
I think, simply put, it's what we can get Putin on. It's a bit like Al Capone. It
Right.
is this smaller, arguably this smaller problem, which the international criminal courts have been able to secure clarity that the international rules have been broken. But clearly, there is a long list of charges against Putin. The unprovoked and illegal invasion itself, in the first place, there's human rights violations, there's breaches of Geneva Conventions, targeting civilians and infrastructure and so forth. But in order to land something which is going to hold water in international courts, they had to look at something which they had evidence for. They were invited by Ukraine, indeed, to look at a wide scale of breaches of international law. And it's this, what they've decided is what they
Okay.
can put out an arrest warrant for. So I very much welcome this indeed. I will say it probably won't affect Putin himself. He's unlikely to be found in court in any day, but it's highly symbolic for Ukraine at a moment in a year where perhaps international support for Ukraine is starting to wane. We've seen the two leading Republican candidates suggest that they will not continue their support for Ukraine. So this is very symbolic indeed, and I'm very pleased it's happening.
Well, I was just going to ask you about that, the kind of symbolism of it. I mean, what does this? Okay, so there's this. Is the symbolism to annoy President Putin, or is the symbolism, as you say, to shore up, other parts of the world and other leaders? And of course, you have got China's President Xi travelling to Moscow next week to hold talks with Vladimir Putin. Is that a signal to people like President Xi as well?
I think something much bigger at play, which the integrated review that we just had touches on, that the fact that our world is changing very, very fast and we're not keeping up. We speak a lot about the international rules-based order, the modern standards and values that we uphold, and indeed Britain helped put together at the end of the last war. But increasingly, we're seeing these rules ignored, and perhaps it's the lack of collective political appetite as we slide towards a multipolar world. Russia and China, in my view, are developing an access to support each other. They've realized it's easy to exploit the West's timidity, and they're advancing their own post-West world order. So what the International Criminal Court is doing today is actually very, very welcome indeed. It's overdue. I hope they'll find cause to issue further warrants for all the elites, all the regime around Putin, because this will send a signal, actually, that despite you wanting to continue what you're doing in Ukraine, the world is watching, and it will affect you in the longer term. But you touch on China as well. I mean, China and Russia, as I say, are working together to take advantage of where our world is going. We're in a very dangerous place when one permanent member of the United Nations Security Council invades another state and another permanent member, China, doesn't condemn it. And that shows you just perhaps how inept, how polarized the United Nations is, that the custodian that we look to hold our nations to account.
And, this idea of President Xi trying to broker some kind of peace or trying to put forward proposals to end the war in Ukraine. What's your reaction to that? And, do you think there's any chance of any progress being made on that? I mean, is any kind of way of stopping this worth pursuing, even if it does come from President Xi?
Well, let's just make it really clear how critical 2023 will be. Zelensky needs to show that he's making progress. He's gaining terrain in order for the West to remain supportive of him, keep providing those weapon systems and so forth. He can only do that if he punches through Russian defenses. That's why he's calling for tanks. It's why he's calling for air power. These are the material assets that he needs to make advances. But if the conflict ends up as frozen in any form, then that suits Putin. That will suit China as well. What China cannot afford is to see its ally defeated, Putin defeated, or indeed replaced. President Xi has few friends in the world, and I believe will actually risk the wrath of the West by quietly increasing its support for Russia to make sure that at this critical time, if the West provide more weapon systems, then Putin can stand his ground, turn this conflict into a frozen one. And that's where China wants to then start offering a deal and to allow negotiations to then move forward. That would be very dangerous indeed. Things would then calm down as they are in the status quo, allowing Putin to regroup, rearm, and do it all again in a couple of years' time.